And our next guest is one of those people you just look at and realize, wow, there truly are some exceptional, incredible young people who are shifting the way that we work and operate across different organizations. So please welcome to the stage, Jasmine. Welcome, Jasmine. Let's hug it up.
Yes, I was tied up back there.
No worries. So, Jasmine, you're going to come sit over here.
Brilliant.
There we go. Youth Forever. Youth Forever is an organization that informs and trains young people and employees to promote intergenerational cohesion to support the transformation of organizations. And you're looking to bridge the gap of corporations worldwide to bring the young generation and perhaps more older generations together to tackle environmental and social challenges. Look, I believe age is just a number and it doesn't reflect experience or attitude, but you seem to have done more things in your late 20s than most 60-year-olds have.
No.
Personally, how have you done that? And tell us a bit about your journey today and what Youth Forever does.
First of all, thank you for this talk. I'm really happy to be with all of you today. I like to think of myself as a slasher, so I like to do many things at the same time, which explains how I get things done. So I started out as a student advocating for causes that I held dear. So mostly environmental change, but also social change, places of women in school and then in the workplace. And so I started out with a podcast, and this is maybe my first advice, is that it was the best way to meet people, to create a network, to branch out towards those with more power and more influence that allow you to drive change afterwards. And so that's how I started Youth Forever afterwards. So basically we are an NGO that studies the relationship to work of different generations. And we do it through youth as strong believers that the young generation is a looking glass into everyone else. So I do not believe in generations as in there's Gen Z and their specific relationship to work, or Gen Y, or Gen X, or baby boomers. It's all a construct that we use in sociology to understand different periods. But I do not believe there's a generational relationship to work. We are in a dynamic, transforming relationship to work. So basically what I do is try and understand how the goals that we are trying to achieve today in the workplace are impacting work and companies, doing it with employees, the men and women who will drive this change. And basically, I try to answer the question, who will do it? All that we're going to talk about today and in the next 3 days is solutions, 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 solutions. But who will do it? Who will be capable? Who will want to? Who will be able to on 10 years, 50 years to come? So I try to answer that question, or at least ask the question in the right places. And so we do studies, mostly bilingual, if you want to check it out on our website. We create workshops and we facilitate dialogue in companies or outside of companies on work and try and drive change doing that.
So I was having a conversation with a friend's dad last week.
Yes.
Who worked within a large company, but within the local division. And he literally said these words: I can't work with 20-year-olds anymore.
Music to my ears.
I just can't. I can't keep up with their demands and rules, which were really interesting words that you used. Is this youth bashing becoming a real problem?
Well, youth bashing is not new. I really like this quote by Hesiod. If you know Hesiod, he's a Greek philosopher from over 2,000 years ago. He said, supposedly at the time, something like, I have no hope for the future if today's youth takes command tomorrow. They are insufferable, they are terrible, they are simply terrible, something like that. I have the French version in my head, I'm trying to translate live. But basically, these types of quotes is kind of a rite of passage growing up. Like, we've all been through our 20s with parents, grandparents, co-workers, having something against our youth. So youth bashing is nothing new. The problem is it's become a narrative. It's become a narrative where we just go on social networks, TikTok or Facebook or whatever, and you type in Gen Z work, I invite you to do this, and then the list of cliches that we find online is just terrible. But we had the same with Gen Y 10 years ago. So there is a youth bashing. The problem is, how do we not make it a narrative that dictates HR or more broadly work? So I get these sentences every day. So a big part of my work is doing conferences and going inside companies to talk about generations and relationship to work. I can speak for hours about it. If you want to create a bit larger conversation, I'd love to. But basically, it's all about deconstructing these notions that we have different relationships to work and getting out of these coffee machine conversations of, oh, that young person in my team is just terrible. He leaves to go to football at 4 in the afternoon, and he texts his friends every day during work, which is, I guess, something we all do now.
But it's interesting that because, you know, those all-important coffee machine conversations that we used to have perhaps pre-COVID,
Yes.
where flexible working and hybrid working wasn't as common as it is today, that's where those intergenerational gaps were often brought together. Has COVID in this hybrid working environment almost increased the divide further?
In a sense, yes. I was talking about the importance of narratives, and COVID was a big moment to shine for youth and seniors. We talked a lot about our elderly in homes and the impact the pandemic was having on them. And we talked about these irresponsible young people partying, breaking curfew to kind of keep a sense of community in a way. Yet it was intergenerational. We went through it intergenerationally. COVID has just created divides in the spaces that we invest at work. I like to say that this potential fracture that we feel between ages is linked to the lack of conversation or lack of dialogue, but also the lack of spaces where we meet. And companies are probably the last places, apart from activism, but then you have to be in specific activist groups. Companies are probably, in work is probably the last place where we meet with people who aren't like us, basically, age-wise, convictions-wise, value-wise. So how do we make this a strength to create these conversations? And maybe the topic is flexibility and not being able to leave to go to see your friends at 4. Maybe the topic is credibility, and is it experience? Is it age-related? Is it due to a diploma? Maybe not. I try to do that as much as possible. What are the underlying conversations behind intergenerational cliches? And it's usually innovation, culture, learning, evolution, activism, timetables, power. It's all of these topics that are underlined in work, but we focus on generations, on a specific group of employees who target these topics. It is a shame, really.
And so what are those traits for organizations that you've worked with that have been able to create a space for those conversations to be had, to be listened to, and then actioned?
Well, I do have to say we have a long way to go. So I work with different companies, from SMBs to major international companies, and the way to go is still quite far. I feel like there's no typical size or typical CEO that kind of broadcasts these messages. What I see is a different definition of diversity. So there's diversity in the sense where you create these categories. We've done it on women equality, for example, where we've said there's women and men, and let's promote women. I have nothing against that. It's worked on many fronts. But at the same time, it kind of reflects on the specific group. And on HR topics and generation specifically, we've created junior programs with a lot of onboarding processes and learning curves for the junior population. Now we talk a lot about senior populations and how do we, in France specifically, handle retirement that's going to be later. And then we talk about parents and helpers and all of these specific groups in companies. Whereas I see where the biggest change is coming forward is putting everyone around the same conversation and not focus on juniors or seniors or parents or whatever. It is practical on the first level, but then you have to create deeper conversation where you make sure that if you talk about employees, the people present are the mirror of the people in the company. If it's a company with a lot of young people, maybe a lot more young people around the table in that conversation. But there is a lot of work, and I see what helps the most is having people from the outside coming in. It creates a sense of trust, creating these conversations on work with some people that aren't from the inside.
And so for anyone in the audience who is trying to make change from within, but they're struggling to get invited to the table, what kind of tips, what advice would you give them to get listened to? And then how does that then lead to impact?
Yeah. So for French speakers here, we did a study that's on our website. It's not translated yet, but it could be. It's going to be.
Google Translate.
It's called Youth in Power. It's all open source on our website. But so we focused on youth committees and shadow boards that were mentioned before, and the terrible, usually output, and people say, oh, it didn't work, and it could be the young people in it or the older, the senior management team that put it together. So we did study these dynamics and try and get out of these biases and how to get a space at the table. On the other hand, we created a training program for under 30-year-olds, and we say it's all about, so in French it's se faire entendre et être entendu. So in English it's how to be heard but also be listened to. And it's all about that. It's not only getting a seat at the table, because that's the first good step, but then how do you make sure that what you're going to say is going to be heard and not just shiny because you've been invited? And I usually say this a lot about activism. Thank you is not enough. It's not enough to make a space on this somewhat shadow committee, because that's not going to drive change. And in my opinion, to give power, you need to let go of power. So to answer your question, my advice would be, how do you stay focused on having follow-up steps? So it's not only being in that space and having this conversation where you say, oh, maybe let's change the timetables for the whole of the company so we can focus on activism on the sides, for example. But how do we stay consistent? How do we put forward KPIs? Who's the person accountable for these measures? It's a lot about defining clarity in these measures. So who, what, when, how long, how will we measure impact or not? How will we stay focused? Do we have any sponsors? It's asking a whole bunch of whys, and there's no really a magic wand to handle that. I'm really sorry about it, but it's all about...
It's complex, right?
Yeah, and I do believe you need to attract people of power and influence, because they're the biggest accelerators to do anything.
Yeah, to get power, sometimes you need to let go of power. It's a really, really strong set of words. I guess, look, there's lots of companies that are talking the talk, but sometimes not walking the walk. And I guess, specifically around topics like climate, like inclusion, what would you do if you worked in an organization where this was the case, and perhaps it was being put on a website, but it wasn't actually being actioned?
That's actually a very... We were talking about, I don't believe in generations, but there are some certain traits or ways, postures linked to age. And for Gen Z specifically, this kind of aversion to bullshit is very strong. And it's kind of a principle that if it's on the website, it's not true. We see that a lot. But then we need to go see proof, basically. We're looking for proof. And I feel like now it's not possible to walk the walk and talk the talk, as you said, if there's no proof. You can't say we're a diverse, inclusive company if you look at the board members, at this executive committee, at the whole top 100 of the company, and you only see white men over 60. I don't want to give offense, but basically it's about being, like, you need to be coherent in the stances that you take. And I know that all companies are not there yet. It's fine, but be humble about it. It's not about these big speeches, and I know these 3 days might get a bit like that, and with all these promises and hope that we want to try and give. I do believe in trust and honesty and being coherent between what you say and what you're going to do. And it's okay to not be there yet, but be bold about it and probably take a stance and follow up. The most important is following up and acting on it and not talking about it.
Yeah, because there'll be lots of leaders in the audience who might even feel like they're being pressurized to make change, because these things do take time. You've just mentioned there's a long list of areas to focus on. How do organizations focus on the right thing, not focus on the wrong topic first? Because if they're trying to do everything all at once, sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's actually kind of more confusing for employees. So where do you start?
I actually like to ask the question of who. This is my favorite question, but there's a lot of people working on the what and the why. The why has been talked about a lot about what is taking place in business models, in social models. I like to say about who today, who tomorrow, who in 10 years, who in 15 years, who will take your place as CEOs or managers today in the next, I don't know, whatever time span is relevant for your business. And that comes back to basic HR conversations. I do believe in shifting HR outside of HR, basically. It's management is topic of everyone.
Yep.
So the who is a really hard question to ask and very uncomfortable when you look at turnover rates. I heard before the panel, the words that they used to talk about the activism was very hopeful, but someone said, I don't sleep much. Someone said, I know people who are anxious, who are depressed. And now it feels like we have to do two jobs at the same time, and to be activists or to drive change, there needs to be sacrifice.
Yep.
And in impact circles like this one, we do kind of our circle of burnout always. And for me, the first question would be, how do we allow this change making it an everyone conversation? Putting together people who don't agree from different age groups with different perspectives. And then probably the second level would be, how do we make it okay and not the extra mile that you're going to have to drive yourself depressed or anxious or completely burned out? So how do you create the conditions to be able to want to drive this change? Because it is complex. It's going to be more and more complex. So it's all our responsibility to create this space. I usually say, and I'll finish with this, when I do conferences or talks, I usually tell the managers, it's usually top 100, top 200, say, like, you are the first mirror of wanting to do stuff in your company. If you look depressed, if you come to work with all your problems, and your examples of people who've had to sacrifice everything and still do, that's going to reflect on the people below you or around you or outside of the company, and that's going to kind of cannibalize everything that you're going to do in the next steps. So how do we represent the courage and the joy of doing this work, but also taking care of ourselves and making it okay to say, this is too much, I can't do it anymore? That's fine, you'll get some rest and come back and maybe do it somewhere else. So yeah, that's a very hard question.
That's really, really interesting. And that vulnerability, I think, is important as a leader. But you're totally right. You can totally wear that. You can wear it as your clothes. You can feel that energy, and it can seep through the company. I've got so many questions, but we're running out of time, which is really unfortunate. But I'm interested to know what is next for Youth Forever. And I'm going to finish with one question after that.
So today we decided to focus on training. I said, how are you heard and listened to? How do we give examples of narratives of activism that are as potent and powerful and joyful as possible. Not naive, or maybe I am a little naive, but I do believe I need it to get forward. So we focus on training programs all across France. My hope is that we get out of France as soon as possible. So we create programs in different territories to train young people or intergenerational groups. So I'll focus on that in the next year. And also we do studies all the time, and my actual topic resonates with what's been said before. It's about work contracts. So I've been working a lot on what are the right contracts to bring this impact in companies. But yeah, I'm available on LinkedIn for anyone who wants to reach out. And if you want to support the NGO, of course, we'll get a conversation going to promote this narrative.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. 5 seconds to go. You're amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Doc.
Nice. Brilliant. Well, let's hug it out. Why not?
And good luck for everyone today. It's going to be dance, but you'll do it.
We have 3 days left of Change Now, guys. Thank you to all of the speakers that have lent their thought leadership. And please do speak to all of the speakers afterwards. Please do speak to me. And I hope you have a really good rest of your conference.